Okay, hello. We're going to be talking about changing motor velocity, brake type, and motor direction, which I've already shown, but I'll just show one more time. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the types of control structures, which is just a fancy name for things like the if-else statements or loops or other things that have an interesting style of flow rather than just going sequentially. So yeah, let's start with the motors. So to change the direction of a motor, you just go to it and click normal or reverse. So pretty simple, right? That's direction. Okay. And now to change the velocity of a motor, maybe when we get into driver control, we want it to be faster than what it is during auton. So we change the velocity of, let's say, the left side to 80% instead of 50. And then you want the left side, let's say, to be, the right side to be just 50%. And when you do this, your robot is going to make a turn. Like when you have it spin, it'll make it turn. Well, ideally, you want to have them both the same velocities. But yeah. Okay, so that's changing velocity. And finally, there is brake types. So brake types are like really cool when they're actually used. So regularly when you just brake on your robot, it'll be like a really sudden jolt on your robot. Now that option is brake itself, that's what brake is. Then there's also coast. So coast is like if you want to gradually slow down or like have like a smoother stop rather than like the jerk that usually happens when you brake. And finally there's also hold. And hold essentially means it'll just stay in a locked position. Like you literally can't physically move the wheels at all because that motor will be locked. So no matter how hard you try to push the robot, it won't move. And by the way, I suggest using that as a function, but up to you to use creativity for that. Anyway, yeah, so that was motor stuff. Now let's talk about control structures. So one of the things you can use is a weight block. You will probably be using this a decent amount in auton. So if you wanted to have it turn and then stop for a second and then continue in spinning the conveyor belt forward, for example. And now once that's done, or actually, yeah, you have it spin more and then you have a stop. Yeah, so as you can see, you just have during auton, again, you're going to use weight mostly during auton. You have your robot move, you can use weight, then you can have a different motor spin. And by the way, when you say spin, it will keep spinning until you specifically tell it to stop. So what it's doing right now here is it'll spin the conveyor belt, then it'll get to this block of code, which it'll wait for, and while it's waiting, it's still spinning, by the way. And then after 1 second, it reads this thing that says stop. Okay, so now the motor is going to stop. So yeah. The other control structures include loops. So there are while loops. While and for loops are the type of loops you'll encounter when you start doing text-based code mostly, but it's good to have an idea of what they are. So while loops essentially mean while some condition is true, it'll keep repeating the code. And as soon as that condition is false, so after it's completed its loop, it comes back to check for the condition. And if it sees the condition is false, then it'll break out of the loop and do whatever is after that. So maybe if I had like LED.turn on afterward, then it'd do that. But so that's a while loop. There's also going to be another type of loop called a for loop, which I guess is not in block code, but a for loop essentially means for a given series of data, it'll iterate through each of those values in that series of data, and every time it iterates through each of them, it'll complete whatever code is inside its loop, if that makes sense. It's okay if it doesn't. I'll explain that again in the text-based code too. But anyway, so there's also these other loops, which are actually just another version of while loops in this case. So repeat is just repeat 10 times, and you can have like an LED turn on, let's say on and off with hang on. So look, what it does here is it turns on the LED, it waits a second while the LED is on, and then it turns off the LED and waits a second, and then it repeats that 10 times. So essentially it's like the LED will blink 10 times with a 1 second interval each time. Yeah, that's using the wait thing. Then there's also forever. You might use that, you might not, but when you use forever, you'll probably want to use this thing called a break statement. And what that means is if a certain condition is met, maybe that condition is very rare to occur, that's why you don't want to use a while loop, and instead you want to use this forever loop. But once this condition is met, it'll break out of that loop. So it'll have kept looping, but if it reads this break statement, it'll just get out of the loop and do whatever's after that. Okay. Then there are if statements. So here is just a plain if statement. It's like if, hang on, since usually you'll use if statements with some sort of input. So if my screen on the brain is pressed, then I want my LED to turn on. See how that works? It follows if this statement is true, then I'll do whatever's in here. And by the way, you could do the exact opposite too. If the screen is not pressed, I want to turn the LED off. Like there are options for that if you do a little bit searching. And then more realistically speaking, you would probably use this input to be from an actual input device, such as your optical sensor. So if your optical sensor sees an object, maybe you want your LEDs to start, oh, hang on. If your optical sensor, why can this not go on? There we go. If your optical sensor sees something, maybe you want your LED to blink 10 times. So you see how it kind of goes, right? And now if the optical sensor found an object, it'll do this. But what if it found, I don't know, a wall instead, and the wall was not sensed as an object but as a different type of sensed thing? Then you have another possibility. So in that case, you could use if an object is found, do this code. Otherwise, if the wall is sensed, then do this code. And if neither of these two statements are true and it hasn't sensed the wall or an object, then it can do whatever is in here. So yeah. Then there is a stop project thing. So maybe if your battery overheats or something and you want your robot to completely stop functioning, you could use stop project. I don't think you'd probably use it for that, but I'm sure you can probably think of a use case for it. And yeah, that's mostly what the control structures are, at least the options you have in block code. Most of these are pretty similar, or they're just kind of understandable by the way they're written. So yeah.